Welcome, everybody. Is everybody ready to engage in some bold resistance? All right. So we're live streaming this event, which means people are watching across the nation, dorm rooms, living rooms, churches. So you actually have to say it loud enough so they can hear you. Are you ready? All right, you sound ready. And that's good because we have an amazing event for you tonight. I'm Deirdre Smith. I will be your host. And I actually feel incredibly honored to be here, not only for this event, but to be in New Orleans. I actually grew up in New Mexico, organizing with my community to transition dirty coal plants. But it's my family who's from New Orleans. And after the displacement of my family because of Hurricane Katrina, I transitioned from being just an environmental justice organizer to a climate justice organizer. I realized that the fossil fuel industry's devastation didn't stop in our backyards, that it was in our atmosphere, that it's everywhere, that it was people like my family, people like the good people of New Orleans, who would suffer. So this is a special night, and I'm really excited that you've all come to join us. Being who I am and where I'm from, I couldn't be more proud to now be part of a movement to divest institutions from fossil fuels. I'm proud to work with organizers across the nation who refuse to be complicit with the fossil fuel industry's dirty games, refuse to be complicit with the destruction of our planet. Divestment from fossil fuels is a tactic to shift the paradigm of a fossil-fueled economy that won't allow for policy or structures that benefit our people. Divestment aims to shift the absurd paradigm that we have to destroy in order to live. So divestment is really, it's more than a campaign. It's a movement, and it's building, and we're already winning. Yeah, right? We can give a woo for winning. And winning looks like a lot of different things. We've made headlines. New York Times, Forbes, The Guardian, Rolling Stone. And more than headlines, we've really built an interconnected, youth-led climate movement that is growing by the day. Already, it's been, a little over a year, and we have well over 300 campuses who are running divestment campaigns. Over 100 institutions, churches, cities, states running divestment campaigns. And 40 institutions have already committed to divesting. Prexy Nesbitt, who worked on South African apartheid divestment, can tell you a little bit about how long it took to build that much power. So I think it's an exciting time. It's exciting how far we've come. But divestment is more than a tactic aimed to build the path for our vision of a better world. It's a solidarity tactic to leverage the power that we have alongside communities that are impacted by this dirty industry. It's a long road. It's a tough road. And as we grow, we have to create a vision that's clearer. And we have to take action that's bolder. And that's what tonight is all about, taking bold action. Luckily, we stand on the shoulders of so many movements for justice that have done the same. And if we listen, we can learn a lot from them. Students fought for divestment from South African apartheid. asking their institutions to take a moral stand against the apartheid regime. And we're honored to have Prexy Nesbitt here tonight, who will tell you all you need to know about that, much more than I can. In fact, I think we should get Prexy out here and give us a taste of what it was like organizing to end apartheid. Prexy Nesbitt.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everybody. You know, we're rocking and rolling. And in South Africa, when they got to rocking and rolling, they had an expression, amandla, which means power. And then the response was ingawethu, which means to the people. So tonight, from time to time, when you hear me hit that amandla, I want you to come back with awethu, okay? Amandla! Except I don't want you to do it like this down. We gotta do it with some energy. Amandla! You got it down. We're all ready to roll. Here we go.
All right, now we're ready. Now we're ready. Round of applause for Prexy. All right, so now you can see the event's much more exciting than moi. We have a lineup of incredible speakers. And so tonight's going to be a series of speeches and covering a range of topics that touch on building a bold resistance. And at the end, we'll have time for questions from y'all in the audience and also from y'all on Twitter. Remember that tonight we actually have a hashtag bold action. Use that hashtag to ask questions to the panelists at the end, to share things about your own divestment campaign. We'll be sharing some videos. Share a comment about how things are going. Here's a sample hashtag, just off the top of my head. You could say something like, wow, Dear is such a great host. She seems really smart, just really on point, or, a question to the speaker, whatever floats your boat. Tweet. Hashtag bold action. Don't forget that part. So before I really want to get started because it's going to be great. But before I introduce the first speaker, I have to thank the people who brought us here. Divest Tulane, are you out there? Yeah. I want to thank y'all and congratulate you on being an incredible leader in the divestment movement. And I've heard about how much power that Divest Tulane has built on campus. As of today, there's over 1,600 signatures on their petition. And Monday, students are going to meet with their president for the second time. Yeah, give Tulane a round of applause. So we better get started so they have material to bring to that meeting because they actually haven't prepared at all. It's a serious problem. That's something you need to work on. I'm just kidding. All right, so let's get going. Bob Massey is our first speaker, and he's coming to us via video. He's an author and strategist. He wrote Loosing the Bonds, an awesome book, also very long. Trust me, I've read it. But it's a great book about South African apartheid divestment movement. He supported that movement. He supports us. I just met him for the first time in California where he spoke to investors and decision makers on California campaigns about why divestment is the smart financial move. He initiated the Investors Summit on Climate Risk. He is the president of the New Economics Institute Coalition. He's awesome. So without further ado, Bob Massey has a message for you.
Totally support the strategy of divestment that you are considering and that you are promoting. I'm going to give you 4 quick reasons why it is essential. First of all, it is the smart thing to do. You'll hear more about this today, but in essence, fossil fuel companies are on a suicide mission from a financial standpoint and from an ecological standpoint. They already have 5 times more resources than we can possibly afford to burn. And yet they not only have those and want to burn them, they are drilling and exploring for more, which makes no sense. So either they're going to succeed and wreck our planet, or at some point, everything that they've done is going to be frozen and the value of those companies is going to drop. And people who have stock in those companies are going to lose an extraordinary amount of money. It's not just me saying this, but investors and banks all across the world. So getting out now makes sense. Secondly, people sometimes say, well, we can't do this because it would violate our fiduciary duty. Fiduciary duty is about defending the interests of people like you. That is, investing so that it benefits universities, students, and youth. But I can tell you right now, there is no fiduciary duty, no legal obligation to own a bad stock. So when somebody comes up to you and says, fiduciary duty, and they expect it to act like a Harry Potter spell and freeze you in your place, you can say, no, these are bad stocks. We understand that we want them purged from our portfolio, and we want to be able to invest in other things that are healthy for our communities and healthy for the environment. Now, sometimes people will say, well, divestment doesn't make sense because it's never effective. You're very lucky to have one of the great leaders of the South African divestment movement, Prexy Nesbitt, there with you in person. And he will tell you about all the forces that came together. In brief, in addition to the amazing leadership and courage of the people inside South Africa, hundreds of thousands and eventually millions of people like you came together and put a stop to the support for the apartheid racist regime. And it built over time because people like you insisted that people who didn't want to pay attention look at this issue and act. And so in 1986, the Comprehensive Anti-Apartheid Bill passed the Congress. The President of the United States, Ronald Reagan, vetoed that bill, and then the Republicans in the Senate amazingly overrode their own president's veto. And that happened in 86. American companies left in 88. Nelson Mandela was released in 1990. The Constitution was written in 93, and the first democratic elections that I was privileged to attend as an international observer took place in 94. And the transformation that people had thought was impossible became real. And then finally, people will say, well, it's not necessary. You don't need to be doing this. I want to tell you, it is urgently necessary. The people that we look to for leadership, for some reason, are paralyzed. Our political leaders, our institutional leaders, universities, our businesses, they somehow have not realized that we are facing what the United Nations calls an existential human threat. That is a threat to human life on Earth. I don't know how the UN could put it more bluntly than that. And yet our leaders are doing nothing. So what is going to cause that transformation? What is going to wake up our leaders so that we finally do the right thing? The answer is principled action by you right here and all across the country. And the actions that you take will encourage and give confidence to other people across the country at other schools and in other places. So it really matters that you take steps now. And if some of you say, well, we can wait and maybe do something later, the answer is no, we have run out of time. So I want to invite you, I want to encourage you, I want to support you in taking urgent action for divestment right now. It is an opportunity for you to play a historic role in the United States. And it is an obligation that I believe you should embrace. And when you take those steps, we will all thank you. Thanks very much for the opportunity. Hello, my name is Bob. Doing nothing. So, what is going to cause that transformation? What is going to wake up our leaders so that we finally do the right thing? The answer is principled action by you, right here and all across the country. And the actions that you take will encourage and give confidence to other people across the country at other schools and in other places. So it really matters that you take steps now. And if some of you say, well, we can wait and maybe do something later, the answer is no, we have run out of time. So I want to invite you, I want to encourage you, I want to support you in taking urgent action for divestment right now. It is an opportunity for you to play a historic role in the United States. And it is an obligation that I believe you should embrace. And when you take those steps, we will all thank you. Thanks very much for the opportunity.
Yeah, big round of applause. He's watching. I bet he's watching. Well, that was Bob Massey. Our next speaker, Prexy Nesbitt, you met for a moment, and I hope you're ready for him to come out here. He has a long history in social movements and a lot to offer us. Have y'all heard about a man named, what's his name? Martin Luther King Jr.? Oh, yeah. Oh, okay. Good, great. We're on the same page. So Prexy Nesbitt participated in actions with Dr. King and has been organizing and teaching since then. So, as a student, Nesbitt initiated the movement on his own campus at Antioch College to divest from South Africa's apartheid regime. In 1975, Nesbitt was highly active in the labor and equality movements and was the national coordinator and field organizer for the Bank Withdrawal campaign for the American Committee on Africa. Recently, Nesbitt was the South African representative of the American Center for International Labor Solidarity in Johannesburg, South Africa. The interim director for the American Friends Service Committee Africa program, and as the senior multiculturalism and diversity specialist for the Chicago Teacher Center at Northeastern Illinois University. Prexy has so much experience, it's a mouthful to even describe. Over the course of his career, Nesbitt has actually been to Africa more than 70 times, including in secret during the apartheid regime. So he's a sleuth. Now he teaches African history in Chicago at Columbia College, and he focuses on South Africa and Mandela. I'm honored and really excited to introduce you to Prexy Nesbitt.
Thank you very much. Thank you. My real start was when I was at Antioch College. I went to Tanzania in 1965. And I had as a roommate a South African young man who had literally walked out of South Africa all the way up to Tanzania and East Africa to join the freedom struggle. I arrived to study there with a big suitcase and a trunk. He arrived carrying a little paper bag with maybe one other extra shirt in it and telling me the story about a man who had just been put on trial and sentenced to life imprisonment, Nelson Mandela. And that relationship was the start of my solidarity. It was start of my commitment to try to do things in solidarity with the struggles of people oppressed worldwide. In the late 70s and 80s, as it became more and more clear that Western capital and corporate engagement was shoring up the South African apartheid regime, disinvestment campaigns began all over the United States, Canada, Japan, Sweden, Germany, all in solidarity with the struggle of the people of Southern Africa. In the US, there was a campaign to both divest, and there was a campaign to end bank loans. The struggle for divestment between 1984 and 1988, there was a rise in the number of divestment steps taken at different colleges from a 53 in 1984 to 155 in 1988. And so I marvel at what you all have been able to do in the year here. And I salute particularly all of you here at Tulane. I'm honored to be your guest here. By the end of 1989, 26 states, 22 counties, and more than 90 cities had either divested public pension funds or had adopted selective purchasing or had stopped doing business with banks doing lending to South Africa. I recall the excitement that we all felt when the University of California divested $3.1 billion worth of its stock in companies involved in South Africa. And also the excitement when we learned that the states of New Jersey and California, that they were taking their public pension funds out of companies involved in South Africa. In all our actions, we were always in dialogue with other struggles, especially with the struggle inside of South Africa. And two pivotal moments. One was the 1976 Soweto uprising, when the regime shot and killed over 1,000 children, many of them in their back. And then the 1977 death of Stephen Biko, died naked in the back of a Land Rover. Those two moments seemed particularly to catalyze us. And in the spirit of the students of Soweto, I think we had certain very strong lessons. We learned to be long-distance runners, not sprinters. We learned that in the spirit of the students of Soweto, that sometimes there were confrontations. Sometimes people were busted. Sometimes we had to up the ante. We had to take decisions that lined up our actions with our values. We learned often that the corporate defenders and the university administrators dedicated to staying and supporting apartheid South Africa were going to be, in some ways, without scruples about what they were willing to do. I've been very struck recently with this whole story that's emerged about the universities and slaveholding that has come up. And we have been saying ourselves, now we know what we used to think about, speculate about, was that maybe these people on these corporate boards were so interlocked with the other boards were really also part of slaveholding. And now we know that so many of those universities were into slaveholding. We learned other lessons. We learned the important value of making sure that everybody we worked with knew what we were doing, and that we were transparent and constantly talking to other people about the meaning of what we were doing. I learned at Antioch College the critical lesson about making sure that everybody around Antioch College knew what we were doing. The day we had our meeting with the trustees and the president, they tried to pull a slick one on us. They suspended the meeting, closed it down, and went into another place they thought to hide. But we had our allies, and the maintenance people told us where they were, and by the time they got in the room, we were sitting there waiting and asking why it took it so long. We had successfully forged relationships with allies on all levels who wanted to know and who became believers in what we were doing. We learned perseverance and resolve. I still have tremendous respect for those people who were at some of the hardcore places like Princeton and Columbia University and Stanford. People who did that great work like you all are today doing, who still are doing the great work of real social change. Even at those colleges and universities where we may have failed to get divestment passed, they may not have withdrawn from banks involved in loans to South Africa. We gained other types of great victories, values and perspectives that have informed generations who have gone through these places where they may have failed to get divestment. We learned of what's good. We learned what's just and fair. We learned what it is to stick to the course and not be suckered in by deceptive and foul maneuvers. Often, they tried to divide the black and the white students on these campuses. We learned about real anti-racism work, anti-sexism work. We learned about the importance of struggling to see a better life, not just for ourselves, but a better life for all the generations to come. It just fills my heart with pride to be here tonight with you all, knowing that we are moving all of us, whatever generation, along the same continuum. Amandla! All y'all can do better than that. Amandla! Thank you very much.
Prexy Nesbitt. So as... Oh, what? What was that? Oh, Bob, your time is over. Shh. So Prexy just illustrated that something that I think we all know, which is justice is a global issue. Our government here in the US sets policies that impact communities globally, and our organizing can impact the decisions of policymakers and society at large. We're just beginning to see what climate change means for our delicate ecosystems that we depend on. We've even had to come up with new names for weather events like Frankenstorm and Super Typhoon. Super Typhoon Haiyan is a devastating example of the types of storms that we're beginning to see with more frequency and intensity. Zeph Repolyo is a climate activist based in the Philippines and has made a video for y'all tonight. She works with youth and students, training young people to be climate leaders. Y'all know something about that, right? That's right. Repolyo also works on building networks in the Southeast Asia region, particularly Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, Singapore, and of course, the Philippines. She's currently 350.org's Southeast Asia coordinator, and she's a friend, a colleague, and an incredible organizer. And here's her video calling you to action. Zeph Repolyo.
The Philippines is the first country to sign a law on climate change and create a national framework strategy on climate change, but its development framework is patterned on the old ways that is promoting more anti-people projects like unregulated mining and more coal-fired power plant projects that threatens our biodiversity hotspots and protected seascapes, damage local economies, and displace many communities that results to land grabbing and displacement, especially among indigenous people. Even worse, the carbon mitigating solutions that are being put forward, such as biofuels and hydropower, through megadams are actually emitting more carbon emissions that results to land grabbing and displacement. Now, being confronted by the catastrophic climate, this is a double jeopardy of our people and their communities. In the eye of the storm, our people are left without the capacity to respond. Last November, we have witnessed the strongest typhoon in the world. Typhoon Haiyan took landfall in the Philippines, hitting the provinces of Samar and Leyte in the eastern Visayas part of the region as badly hit. Haiyan decimated the whole towns in a matter of hours because of its powerful rains and storm surges. It left in its wake thousands of deaths, which authorities fear to rise up to 10,000. But as we speak, there had been 6,000 plus dead bodies retrieved and 1,000 remain missing. That time, world leaders for their annual climate meetings, whose process have been very slow and difficult. What the people needed was a bold commitment at the expense of thousands of innocent lives lost in the Philippines. Their delay and inaction is a grave insult to families and communities in the Philippines that have caused so little but are bearing the brunt of these climate impacts because our world leaders, like your government, cannot step up and stand for justice. It is terribly unfair that developing countries like the Philippines are the ones paying the price for such neglect. Carbon dioxide is filling up the atmosphere, and if we allow the fossil fuel industry to burn more coal, oil, and gas, we are just allowing the world to experience another super typhoon, tolerating injustices, and not giving the developing countries a fair chance to develop. This generation has an important and critical role to play in our universities, in our communities, and in the world. This generation must change the course if we wanted to have our future and to realize our dreams and have a world we can love. In the Philippines, we seek a qualitative leap of the climate movement struggle, particularly in issues and concerns carried by frontline communities who are directly impacted by climate change. This is our clear response to the impacts brought by Super Typhoon Haiyan as the foremost issue our country is facing. As we speak, our volunteers are preparing for Power Shift Pilipinas that will be launched on March 26 to 29, 2014. We dubbed the event Sulong, which means forward in English. We need to shift power to include the voices of the majority, particularly the marginalized sector. We need to shift power to end fossil fuel dependence and destructive policies that threatens our climate and our people. And we need to shift power to demand for climate justice and demand for deep and drastic cuts on emissions for developed countries. And we will be doing this through strengthening our policy work, intensifying frontline communities campaign, organizing, and movement building. But as a problem that is truly global, we needed your help. We need you to call on your government to urgently act on the climate crisis by cutting deep their emissions because it costs so many lives in the Philippines. We need to strengthen international collaboration rooted in justice and solidarity. We need to direct our actions against the fossil fuel industries and governments collaborating with them. We need to assume leadership. We need to get involved, organize, and collectively strategize for our common future. International solidarity does not end up by standing in unity with frontline communities. It goes with getting involved, organizing ourselves, and mobilize for concerted efforts against fossil fuel industries. Climate change knows no boundaries, and so we must collaborate as citizens of this world, regardless of age, gender, ethnicity, race, or religion. I always believe that there is nothing more powerful than people working together in a unified action to address climate change. So let us hold our leaders accountable while urging institutions to divest from fossil fuel industries. Like what we say in the Philippines, sulong, padayon. I am Zeph Ripolio, 350.org South for concerted efforts against fossil fuel industries. Climate change knows no boundaries, and so we must collaborate as citizens of this world, regardless of age, gender, ethnicity, race, or religion. I always believe that there is nothing more powerful than people working together in a unified action to address climate change. So let us hold our leaders accountable while urging institutions to divest from fossil fuel industries. Like what we say in the Philippines, sulong, padayon.
Woo! Clap real loud for Zeph. So I think that Zeph did a really great job of broadening our scope to the global struggle that is the climate justice fight. But let's get a little grounded in some local organizing. Cherri Foytlin is a Louisiana resident and community organizer. She focuses largely on human health impacts of the BP oil spill and other environmental justice issues. She actually walked all the way from right here in New Orleans to Washington, D.C. To call for action against the BP drilling disaster. She writes for Bridge the Gulf and authored the book Spill It, The Truth About the Deepwater Horizon Oil Rig Explosion. Tonight, she'll be talking to you about the fight for justice in the Gulf. Cherri!
Thank you, and thank you for coming tonight. I work for a project called Bridge the Gulf, and what we do is we go into communities and we uplift voices that are there from their own voice, and we get those stories out because the media doesn't get that out very often, you know, especially from the human standpoint. And I go on a lot of trips, and I've been all along the Gulf Coast, and so tonight I'd like to take you on a trip with me, if you don't mind. I want you to pretend like you're a bird and that you're going up into the air and that you're seeing in a 500-mile radius around the Gulf Coast. And I want you to look off and I want you to see the 25-acre and growing sinkhole in Bayou Corn that was actually a mining accident the DNR knew about. And then I want you to look at the BP tar balls and the SUV-sized mats that are breaking up and still coming ashore in our Gulf Coast and our waters. Over 1,000 in Florida just last week. And I want you to think about the elevated dolphin mortality rates and also the tunas that are in cardiac arrest every time there's an oil spill out there, and there's one every day. I want you to think about Manchester and Port Arthur that's already receiving oil from the Keystone XL. I want you to think about Grand Bois, Louisiana, which is not far from here, where there are many stillbursts from the open-air tar pits that are there. I want you to think about Cancer Alley, which is between here and Baton Rouge, and a 107-mile stretch that has 156 industrial facilities and emits about 130 million pounds of toxins in the air every year. About the 62.2% of those releases that are in low-income and communities of color. Of those, I want you to think about the 17 refineries in Louisiana alone that reported 327 accidents in 2012. That's about 6 a week. And also about 2 million pounds of air pollution and about 12 million gallons of water pollution. I want you to look off to the Atchafalaya Basin where you can see them cutting down the ancient forests, trees that have been there since the time of Jesus. They're cutting them down and they're sending them to Europe for energy production. I want you to think about the coal terminals in Ironton, Myrtle Grove, and Wood Park, where the people that are ill, some people have been to the hospital 100 times in the last year for illnesses. And you know what? This list is incomplete, because you can add the train derailment in Alabama, and you can add the train derailment in Mississippi, and you can add the land loss about the size of the state of Delaware since 1932 here in Louisiana. See, the truth of the matter is, above All of the above energy means all of the above trade-offs. Let me say that again. All of the above energy production means all of the above trade-offs. And the common thread to these communities is poverty, illnesses, sick and dying wildlife, dead rivers, toxic air, a lack of representation. And sadly, we're not the only ones. Because you can go to Canada and you can go to tar sand communities up there and see the same issues. You can go to Appalachia and see the same issues in coal country. You can go to New Mexico and the Dakotas to see uranium mining, and on and on and on. See, because this issue is really about protecting life. Because there are people out there that actually think that life is disposable. They actually think that they can assign a number, a monetary number to life, and that some people are worth more than others. See, I don't believe that. I don't subscribe to that. I believe that clean air, water, and soil is a human right. I also believe it's a right to all creation. Now, the people that are going to stand in our way from this divestment campaign or anything you care to do to protect each other are like politicians, right? And they're always going to talk about money. That's what they do. They talk about it. And they're not talking about the money that's paid in Medicaid, your taxes, to low-income communities that sometimes have 20, 30, 40% of the community, the children have cancers or they have asthmas. They're not talking about that. They're not talking about Social Security from people that can't work either because of these illnesses and sicknesses. No, they're talking about fracking wastewater barges down the Mississippi. That's their projects. They're talking about developing tar sand mining in Alabama and Mississippi. They're talking about pipelines that run through the watershed and the drinking water for all of Mobile, Alabama. They're talking about coal terminals, tank farms, and container cargo ports in the same places in Louisiana that flooded during Hurricane Isaac. And I'm talking 5 to 8 feet in little old Hurricane Isaac. They're going to talk about jobs, man. The industry and politicians in particular love to talk about jobs. Let me tell you about jobs. You know there are 6,000 abandoned wells in the state of Louisiana alone? Over 27,000 in all of the Gulf waters. And these wells aren't regulated. They're not watched, and they sure aren't repaired. And some of them have been there since the 1940s, way before you and I were born, maybe some of your grandparents or your parents. Heck, Taylor Energy has a well out there that's been leaking for 10 years, nearly 10 years, a decade. These are not job creators. These are job killers. They are stealing opportunities from our people. You want to put people to work? Put people to work fixing their ailing infrastructure. They're lying to the public, they're lying to the shareholders, and they're lying to you. They abandon their workers. Workers out there in the Gulf Coast, they suffer injuries, illnesses, they die young. They get told they are paid to die. And who was the first to die on the Deepwater Horizon? The first 11 oil workers. And do you know when BP apologized? 3 years later at a fairness hearing, weekly, to a few of the widows that happened to be there. Let's divest our money, heck yeah, but let's divest our minds, right? These people profit from keeping the status quo, right? They keep us mired in doubt. Can we make this new infrastructure? Can we build this new economy? They're clouding our future. In a world that's lit up so bright that men and women have forgotten the stars, we are living in a great time of darkness. We are living in a world of wounds. But I have to remind you of something. I have to remind you that people say it's often darkest before the dawn. You should know that there's a keyhole of light out there and that light is growing. Across this land, across cultures, across regions, across issues, across religions, we are building and we are piercing through that night. We are beginning to understand that we are the resource, that we are the key, that you are the key. Together, we're going to find that door. And when we do, we're going to swing it wide open. It's time to liberate ourselves and our futures from the bondage of wasteful and destructive practices and patterns that profit the few at the expense of the many. We need to liberate ourselves from the idea that puts profits over our lives. We must hold this industry responsible and accountable, and the best way to do that is through the only thing that they seem to care about, which is money. Divest your money, divest your mind. When you leave here tonight, I need to ask a favor. When you leave here tonight, I want you to go and I want you to tell others that the light of liberation is coming. I want you to tell us that it will bathe us in the dawn of a new day and a new economy and a new future for our people. And it won't be easy, and there will be sacrifices, just like in every righteous battle of the past. Yet we must rise and be worthy of this dark and historic hour. Be bold, young writers, policymakers, lawyers, teachers, artists, musicians, lovers in all forms. Be bold, be bold, be bold. This is the time of the song of liberation. We need to speak of our freedom from dirty, toxic, life-stealing air. We need to tell them that our children will drink again from the sacred waters. You tell them that you will make it so. And they're going to ask you why. And when you do, you tell them it's because you love them. You tell them that the light you shine is love. You tell them that you are love, and you will beat back the darkness.
Okay, Cherri, you got me all fired up, and I have a show to do. Cherri is amazing. Are you all fired up now? A little bit? All right. That was incredible, and I feel really good. And guess what? Your experience with Cherri doesn't have to end here. If you're wanting to be more a part of the environmental justice, woo, is it Bob again? Bob, don't you do it. If you want to be more part of the environmental justice fights here in New Orleans, I have a great event for you to go to. Mardi Gras. I'm just kidding. No, the Louisiana Water Festival, March 8th. It's at the state capitol at noon. Got it? Where are you going? What time? All right, sweet. Cherri will be there, along with a lot of other awesome people. So the next speaker is going to be joining us via Skype, live person, video. And like Cherri, reported on one of the largest and highest profile failures of 2010, the BP oil spill. Naomi Klein is oh, y'all have heard of her? Cool, yeah, she's great. She's an award-winning journalist, syndicated columnist. She's also a member of the 350.org board of directors and author of the #1 international bestseller on the New York Times list, The Shock Doctrine, The Rise of Divester. See, I always got divestment on the mind. The Rise of Disaster Capitalism. Naomi Klein makes the case that corporations and capitalism-friendly governments not only profit from disaster and conflict, but actively work to exploit countries in crisis. Writing in the wake of Hurricane Sandy, she warned that the climate crisis contributes a massive opportunity for disaster capitalists and the corporations seeking to profit from crisis. She argues in her upcoming book that the climate crisis can alternatively be a historic moment. And I really believe that. Do you think the climate crisis can actually be a historic moment to usher in the great wave of progressive change? Good. So that's, Naomi Klein calls that people's shock. I love that. So without further ado, Naomi Klein.
Can you, how's it working? Can you see me okay? Can you hear me? Great. I wish I could see you. I was watching the live stream, and this is an amazing event. I was incredibly moved by Cherri's words just there. And it made me really realize that, we have these discussions about people feeling discouraged, and there are moments, when we get depressed and it just seems too much, and you're working at a university and you've worked really hard on a campaign and you just hear no, and it can be really frustrating. But I think when you listen to voices on the front lines of this ecological disaster who are dealing with the toxic repercussions of the fact that we have an economy that is fueled by death. I mean, that's what fossil fuels are. We dig up the dead. We have become a society of grave robbers. And all we are saying, which is such a simple thing to say, is that we think that we should fuel our lives with life, with the power of the sun, with the life-giving power of the sun and the wind and the waves, and we should live on the surface of the planet. Obama talks about the all of the above energy policy, and I think we need to answer with the fact that we want a none of the below energy policy, and we will stand for nothing less. We do not have the luxury of being discouraged. It's simply not an option. It's not an option for your futures. It's not an option for the people who are already on the front lines and are already having their presence sacrificed. It is true that I believe that climate change can be an opening. I believe it can be a revolutionary moment. I think it changes the conversation in a fundamental way. It is the meta crisis in which all other crises fit inside. And just to give you an example of the way in which it changes the conversation, as you know, we're having a very weird winter. It's particularly bizarre in the UK, where there's been just devastating flooding. And this has become a political crisis for the government of David Cameron, which is really kind of one of the poster pro-austerity governments in Europe right now. They've brutally slashed social services, hiked tuition, and really tried to solve the crisis created on Wall Street and exported around the world on the backs of the most vulnerable. A few days ago, David Cameron said about the response to the flooding, money is no object. Now, people thought they would never hear those words come from David Cameron. Money is no object. But in the face of the kinds of shocks that climate change is already delivering and will deliver with increasing ferocity, even politicians that are within that austerity paradigm have to change. And this is why I think it's so crucial for us to enter this discussion with a very, very bold vision not just for divestment and not just for leaving those fossil fuels in the ground, but what we want to build above ground. Because what climate change allows us to do is change the conversation in this way, is simply say that there are things that are more important than money. And that's what David Cameron understands. When people see flooded streets and lives at risk, they don't want to hear about money. They don't want to hear about balanced budgets. They want the money to be spent because they understand that money is a construct, but the ocean is not. And so this is the space that we need to enter into. So while I think it is important to win those financial arguments with your investment advisors, I also think you can get overly sucked into it. And that what this really is a debate about morality. It is, as Cherri just said, it is about whether we value lives more than money. And I think the onus is on you to create and recreate the moral crisis of climate change. Bring it to your campuses in every way that you can. And that means bringing frontline voices that make this not an abstract issue that people are learning about in class, but make it real, make it human. Find every way that you can to bring the actual issue into your campus spaces. And that's how you do bold action. I think, we talk about sometimes divestment as a movement, and I know that you are part of a powerful student movement and one that I'm tremendously grateful for. But I think it's important to understand, and I think you do understand, that the movement is much bigger than divestment. This is one tactic within a broader, growing, swelling movement. You are part of an ecosystem of resistance that is spreading so quickly, that has setbacks, that wins victories, that is fighting the fossil fuel economy on every front, whether they won a ban against fracking in all of France, for instance, or whether they're fighting the Northern Gateway pipeline that will ship tar sands oil to the west coast of Canada, or the Keystone XL pipeline to the south, or Line 9, which comes through my city, Toronto, or whether they're fighting coal export terminals in the Pacific Northwest and have already defeated 3 of those terminals, or shutting down coal-fired power plants. It's happening on every front. It's happening at the site of extraction. It's happening at the site of transportation. It's happening at the site of refining. And what divestment offers is the kind of the meta approach, because one of the things that people on the front line are constantly hearing is, well, you know, it really doesn't matter if you fight the Keystone XL pipeline, because they'll get the oil out some other way. They'll get it through trains, or they'll get it through another pipeline. Or even if we shut down the tar sands, well, they'll get that carbon out, you know, in Venezuela, or they'll get it out somewhere else. And they're constantly trying to make us feel helpless. None of this is true, by the way. These campaigns do matter. All of them matter. But I think where divestment is so important is that it's our response to that nonsense argument, which is, oh no, we're not just going after one project at a time. At the same time as we go after these single projects, we're also going after your entire business model through divestment. And so we're fighting them on all these fronts. At the front lines, we're fighting them in court. Nebraska just won a major victory on Keystone XL. We have indigenous groups in North America, in court. Very important lawsuits happening in Canada. The Athabasca Chippewa First Nation, the Beaver Creek First Nation, both have major lawsuits taking on the Canadian government, taking on tar sands producers like Shell, saying that their extraction violates their treaty rights. These lawsuits are scaring the hell out of these businesses and are creating an uncertain investor climate. And that's what you're part of too. It's all creating an uncertain investor climate. You know, and we just had an incredible victory, which is that in the last quarter, Shell announced historically poor profits. I mean, this is one of the most profitable companies, as Bill McKibben says, in the history of money. And here they are shocking their own investors by having their profits down something like 40% below what they expected. And Shell was forced to announce that they're putting their plans for Arctic drilling on hold. So understand that we are winning victories all the time, that you are part of this ecosystem. Are these victories enough? No way, not even close. They're not enough. But what you don't know when you're part of a movement like that, with all of these different front lines, is that we never know what the tipping point is going to be. You know, we never know what is just going to finally, push down this house of cards, and that's why these warnings are so important, and that's why these investors take notice, because they remember 2008 when the banks started collapsing, and it looked like 1 minute it looked like they were robust, and then they weren't. The same thing happened with the dot-coms. You know, the financial world is incredibly precarious. And so all we can do is just keep putting pressure on all fronts, understand that all of our various strategies complement each other, but understand that we are not a movement that is just about any single one of these tactics, or even a movement that is just about saying no. You know, you've heard from some major voices from the anti-apartheid movement, and of course that movement was an anti-apartheid movement. It was not a divestment movement. Divestment was one tactic among many, but I think sometimes when we tell that history, we overplay the importance of divestment. It was incredibly important, but it would have been nothing without the South Africans on the ground risking their lives, losing their lives in moments like the Soweto massacre. I mean, these were the moments that in which the world saw the brutality of this regime. And that is obviously why we were divesting at that time. This is how I got into activism, was as a student like you. I was in my first year when I attended my first sit-in of the university president's office calling for divestment, and went to my first, governing council meeting, and we were, of course, condescended to and shut down, and all of it, and the rest of it is history. But I think what's one of the things that's so important about looking to the South African model is that it was that ecosystem of a movement of all of these tactics on the ground, and then the support divestment movement taking direction from the front lines. But it was also a movement with a clear vision of the world that it was fighting for, of the transformation that it wanted. And our movement needs to be that. And this is where I think reinvestment is going to become increasingly important for the movement. Because as you build alliances with frontline communities, I think what you're going to start to hear more and more is what I've been hearing more and more in my research is that in the communities that are really bearing the brunt of this toxic economic model, they are doing everything they can with incredibly scarce resources to do things like take companies like Shell to court. But at the same time, what they're being told by their people is we need jobs. We need economic alternatives. And one of the things that the fossil fuel industry is really good at doing, as Cherri mentioned, is killing other possibilities. I mean, you poison an environment so much that you can't fish, that you can't hunt, that you can't have a tourism industry because it's all destroyed. I mean, one of the saddest things I ever saw was being in Louisiana during the BP disaster and seeing all of these fishermen having no choice but to take a job with BP on the so-called Vessels of Opportunity program, where their fishing boats, which were unable to fish for obvious reasons, were turned into sort of ad hoc, useless cleanup vessels, and they were sent out to clean up BP's mess. What they were doing was utterly useless. They knew it. They were basically putting down cotton balls in the middle of this massive spill. But they also were incredibly humiliated that they had no choice, that they had to go to the company that had destroyed their livelihoods because that was the only one offering a job. And I say this because I think there is a moral imperative to create economic alternatives in the frontline communities that are most impacted by fossil fuels. Yes, we need wind, solar, wave energy, but most of all, we need those economic alternatives in coal country, in tar sands country. We need them exactly where they're most effectively pitting workers against environmentalists. And so I think one of the ways to really energize the divestment movement is to add a very, very strong reinvestment piece, which is not just a sort of green energy piece. Yes, that's important, but is very rooted in these frontline communities and supporting things like the Black Mesa Water Coalition's incredible plan that they've had that articulated now for several years, where they want to take land that has already been contaminated by coal mining and put up municipal scale, utility scale solar farms, that kind of thing, where the money stays in the communities. There are all kinds of projects and proposals like this on the books, and if people felt that the resources could really be there, they would be all that much more motivated to fight for these alternatives. So I think we have that moral imperative to lessen the economic burden, because we understand that it is the frontline communities that have the most power in this equation to say no, to refuse to allow fracking on their land, to refuse to allow tar sands drilling on their land, to fight these companies. But we can't ask some of the poorest people in our respective countries to bear the burden of this resistance for them. We also owe them a kind of a reparations debt to bring the economic alternatives to them. So I do think that this is an incredibly exciting moment. And in closing, I would just say that I think the deeper you get into this issue, the bigger it gets. And that's one of the things that's really scary about it, is that you start with a campaign that seems kind of focused. Okay, we're just going to ask our school to divest from fossil fuels. Doesn't sound that complicated. And then it gets a lot more complicated. I was just reading a post from a student at Berkeley who was describing some of the conversations that they had been having with graduate students who were afraid of losing their their BP research money if there was an effective fossil fuel divestment movement. And suddenly you're talking about why education has to be subsidized by multinational corporations at all, and why we don't fund post-secondary education in a just way. And I think rather than being afraid of where this leads and to the deeper questions this leads to about inequality and what we really value, we should see all of this as opportunities for alliance building, of building a genuinely broad-based, as diverse a movement as we possibly can, rather than just thinking about being narrowly focused on our goals. Yes, we need narrowly focused goals, we need wins, they're important, but this movement cannot be too broad. So follow this where this leads. Have the courage to go deep. The fossil fuel companies are digging deeper and deeper to dig out their toxins, and we need to dig deeper and deeper in ourselves and in our communities to come up with real solutions. Thank you.
Naomi Klein. That was incredible. And I wouldn't want to follow Naomi Klein, but I can assure you our last speaker is no less awesome. Allie Welton finished her sophomore year at Harvard College in May, but the urgency and importance of the climate crisis has actually driven her to take time off indefinitely to work on fighting the fossil fuel industry and building the movement for climate justice. While continuing to work on divestment at Harvard, she also organizes with the Massachusetts-based Students for a Just and Stable Future network for a more equitable public transit system, and with Better Future Project against new fossil fuel infrastructure, some of what Klein was talking about. So I'm really excited to introduce you to our last speaker, Allie Welton.
Cool. So I wanted to start off by telling you all a story about the power of bold action. I heard from a guy called Ed Childs. Ed is a cook in one of Harvard's dining halls, and he's worked there for decades. He's organized with the union, knows more about campus organizing history than pretty much anyone I know. And he's told me about contract fights they've had where it looks like our administration is never going to budge. They have meeting after meeting, they hold rally after rally, they organize students to speak up in support of our workers, they organize faculty, even alumni, and sometimes even after all that, our administration won't move. But at these few times in our campus's history, there have been days when our workers show up to work and they say, "We're not serving lunch today." Every single time, they've won their contract by dinner. That tells you that bold action wins campaigns. And I think bold action is something that our divestment movement, the youth climate justice movement, really needs to embrace this semester, because it's really, you know, as the window of time to deal with the climate crisis is shrinking, this is really the do or die moment for us. And I think the divestment campaigns had a lot of energy last year when we were sort of growing from the spark at Swarthmore to a whole wildfire that spread across the country and now even around the entire world. But then our university presidents started tangling us up in these useless investment committees, or just slamming the door in our faces and telling us no outright. And I think we're in a little dangerous place right now. If we have the chance to respond to those no's in a way that builds our power as a movement, or we have a chance to flounder and lose this incredible opportunity. But like the dining hall workers' strike tells you, bold action works. And it works because it can't be ignored. We can put our bodies in the way of the machines that are abusing us, just like the dining hall workers when they don't serve lunch. And actions are megaphones. They're our way of grabbing the megaphone back from the fossil fuel industry, which has, you know, created such a strong narrative in our society. And our presidents at universities are using their talking points, telling us that we have no choice, that we're being silly, that we have, you know, we'll never free ourselves of this addiction to fossil fuels. But we can we can change the conversation here and change the game. We can tell a different story. We can expose the truth. And the truth is that it's us versus the fossil fuel companies right now. There's no neutral ground. Sticking with the status quo is siding against us. And well-designed actions can make that clear, and we can make our presidents make that decision on stage in front of thousands of people. And then we can see if they have stronger spines when everyone's watching them. And I think the other reason that bold action is really, really important for us is I don't think there's a reason for our trustees to take us seriously if we're not acting according to what we're saying. If we don't act according to the scale and urgency of the climate crisis and, you know, the horrors created by the fossil fuel industry right now, our trustees aren't going to take us seriously. But if we're taking bold, fearless action that shows just how much this means to us, I think they'll start taking us seriously and not thinking that we're just full of empty, hollow words. Last October at Harvard, our president gave us this very long-winded no in a very long letter to us. And from that moment, we've known that we needed to escalate. But, you know, we've written fiery letters. We even signed something saying we would escalate. And we've come up with escalated action ideas. But every time there are excuses for why we shouldn't do it yet. And I think there are two things that have been standing in our way of taking, you know, bold action in this moment. The first one is a strategic fear. People are worried that taking bold action will drive people away, it'll scare them off, it'll alienate them. That's wrong. Well-designed actions don't alienate the people you don't want to alienate. But what does drive people away is being part of a dead, defeated movement. After President Faust gave us that no, our campaign just fell to the side of the road. We're like roadkill now. We're twitching. It's not something attractive that anyone wants to join, you know? But if we start taking bold action, we'll have energy again. We'll have life. We'll have a path towards victory. And that hope is something other people want to be a part of. And it can rejuvenate the movement right now. So I think the other thing that stopped students from taking really bold action has been just personal fear about the consequences that could come. But we all know that there are far worse things out there than having our parents angry at us because we didn't pass a biology test. You know, we need to listen to people like Cherri from communities that are the sacrifice zones for the fossil fuel industry. Those people are the experts on what the fossil fuel industry will do, and we know they're ruthless. They have proven over and over that they will kill people if that increases their profit. They will willingly destroy communities, knowing full well what they're doing. Our generation would be stupid if we thought they'd treat us any differently. They're about to condemn us to this warped, shattered future where millions of us, if not billions, will die from the climate crisis. They've known about it for longer than I've been alive, and they still haven't done anything. It's time to draw the line. And, you know, they're the wealthiest industry on the planet. Fighting them will mean casualties, it'll mean risks, and it'll mean real sacrifices. We have to embrace that, or else we'll never win. You know, we can look, Prexy, who spoke earlier, he was expelled from Columbia College for what he did. Student civil rights activists, younger than me, were beaten, they were attacked by dogs, they were jailed, some of them were even murdered for their work. Our issue is just as important as those causes, and we must also, you know, find it in ourselves to embrace those risks and, you know, acknowledge our fears but move past them to be bold. And we do live in an incredibly lucky, extraordinary moment right now because we still have the time to make a difference. You know, if we were born 10 years later than we were, we wouldn't have this choice. But we are the generation right now that gets to decide: do we just sit back and inherit the crumbling, shattered society that the fossil fuel CEOs are trying to leave us? Or do we act up and fight back? Do we show through divestment and other youth climate actions that our generation is determined to build a future of climate justice, and we are determined to build a future without any fossil fuel companies? That's our choice today. And so my call to you all now is, as an entire youth climate justice movement here, we need to be bolder, we need to be braver, we need to take more risks. You can start next weekend with the XL dissent action against the Keystone XL pipeline in DC. And, you know, for tonight, our ask to you is to go and find an example of an inspiring, bold action from one of the past social justice movements whose shoulders we're standing on right now. Tweet about it using the hashtag bold action so we can start having this conversation across the country about what bold action is and what it means to each of our campaigns all over this country and the world. And yeah, so last thing to leave you with, we must be absolutely clear to our university presidents and other decision makers in this society that they will know no peace until we bring the fossil fuel industry to justice. So be bolder this semester, push boundaries, challenge yourself to pick strategy over comfort, and we'll have a chance at winning, because bold action is the only chance left for our generation in this moment.
Good Lord. Give it up. Come on. Holly Welton, I told you, didn't I tell you? How about we close this piece off before we go into the Q&A section with a video from yours truly, Divest Tulane.
To divest and corrupt corporations that are destroying the planet.
That video was good, but that music was really good. All right, y'all. So I will wrap up this speaking session by saying you heard, how awesome were the speakers tonight? Incredible. Right? And how awesome, we saw a rally from Tulane, but what do we need? What we need now is for y'all to take it into your hands. It's time to bring the narrative of bold action to your communities, to your campus, to engage in the national dialogue of escalation. So, get bold. And get bold with your questions. So let me welcome the speakers back out. Yeah, big round of applause. I'm excited we get to take some questions from the audience, and we'll see. This is my first time taking questions via Twitter, and I feel really fancy. We'll see if we get some good questions via Twitter with the hashtag bold action. So, any questions from out in the audience? Don't worry, they're coming, they're coming.
Yeah, what's up, y'all? My name is Emma. I'm a member of Divest Tulane. So first, thank you so much for coming. This has been a really awesome panel, and I've enjoyed it a lot. And also, I guess I wanted to ask how y'all reconcile systematic action with like your individual impacts. So like, for example, flying to direct action is something that I've been like thinking about a lot. And how y'all balance like yourself with fighting for more systematic change.
Thanks for the question.
Yeah, thank you.
So why don't we have Cherri, let's have Allie start, and if either of y'all have something to add. Sound good?
Yeah. So the question there was basically like how you reconcile like systemic activism and like the resource costs of that look like they go in confrontation to environmentalism. Yeah. Well, to be honest, I feel like I have very little faith in the ability of individual lifestyle changes to, affect change at the scale we need. And so I do try to like minimize my resource consumption as much as I can, but I'm absolutely okay flying or traveling long distances for the movement, because I think in the long run, movement building is what's going to change the game. And being able to be here and talk to you all and that sort of thing, I think is far more important than, I don't know, sitting at home and not doing anything. I think if it gets in the way of us taking action, that cripples our movement. So, that's my feeling about it.
I think that the crisis that we're in is so deep right now that it can't be solved in any way by just individual actions. There has to be a group systematic response. I live in a community where there is no food provided that's healthy food. It's a community that it's a desert community. It's a community that is characterized by massive levels of drug violence that's aided and abetted by the law enforcement agencies that are supposedly going to prevent it. These are all things that are going to take serious group action. And I think it's stuff that we have to work on for a long, long time, our lives. I don't expect to see total change in my life, but I do expect to see my sons and my daughter continue on in the kind of path that I've been in. I expect to see young people that I've worked with move on, and that we have no choice about that. I think Naomi Klein is completely correct. This is not a question or a situation where you can, if you wake up and if you smell the coffee, you got to understand that this is a rotten, rotten structure. And we have to move it all the way down. And it may take a lot of sacrifice, and it may have to be done in phases. You may have to be a long distance runner. You can't sprint to these things, but it's got to move all the way through on all the levels. It's about systems and institutions that have to be changed.
So I think you have to meet people where they are. And honestly, for some people, if all they can give is to turn off their lights, that's cool. That's great. That's helpful, you know? And if you can do more, then do more. And if you can be more, then be more. So I'm not going to discourage anyone from taking those little steps in their life that make those changes. For myself, when I first started this journey, which was just 4 years ago with the BP disaster, one of the first things I did was install solar panels on my house. It cut my bill down to a third. I loved it. I appreciated it. I told all my friends, you know. That's all I could do in that moment, just coming back. And I think that was good. And it grew from there, because honestly, it really made me start thinking about my footprint, but also the footprint of my friends, and that encouraged them, and that grew them. And where I went on to speak out and to do things, you know, maybe they didn't, and that's okay too. But I think whatever you can do in the space that you have and the time that you have is a very powerful thing, you know. But I 100% agree that that's not enough. I mean, in the crisis that we're in and in the place that we're in, it's going to take bold actions and movements, and it's going to take people that are willing to make those sacrifices and changes in their lives, you know. The president of BP said not too long ago that there were in storage right now, they had 50 years worth of oil and gas. 50 years to me, I don't know about y'all, but that seems like a long time. Like, I figured, well, I mean, if we have 50 years, that's 50 years that we can take that now and put it into developing renewable energy and trying to figure out the answers. Because I don't know if solar panels are it. It still causes, you know, damage. There's still mining and causes damages to the people in those communities. But I do know that if we're not putting our time and our money into that economically, then we'll never find those answers, right? So, yeah, I feel like however you want to move the movement, just make it move, you know?
Carbon footprint or carbon busting fist print, right? Okay, guess what? We have a Twitter question. So I'm going to go to Twitter and go to you. Don't forget your question now. So the question is from Ethan Howley, and it's, what do you say to someone who is willfully ignorant or dismissive of the climate crisis? Cherri, do you want to take that?
You move on. You know, we don't got time to mess with these people. I mean, honestly, they're either ignorant or they have people in the industry, or, you know, I don't sit there and waste my time dealing with someone that's going to argue with me, because I don't have time to convince one person. Like, I mean, I go out to the masses if that's what's needed. Because honestly, for that one person, that time you're going to waste trying to convince them, there's 1,000 people out there that will listen. So if they're willfully meaning purposely not going to hear, then they just want to argue. Be gone. I got other stuff to do, right?
You got an applause for that. All right, let's take a question. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Joseph, and I just kind of want to, I thank you guys for coming. You've been doing a great job of vision casting to us here at Tulane and abroad. But I really want to kind of build on these questions and ask, because I think we tend to have this idea, basically I want to ask, how do we start to respect, but also to I'm just going to use the word again, vision cast to these communities of people that are either have jobs in these industries such as coal and gas, and that's their livelihood, and they see us as environmentalists trying to take away their livelihood, and it seems very disrespectful. And also to the point of, in tandem with that, how we can also continue to vision cast to communities that literally do not have any other resources, like Prezi said, that they're in food deserts, that they have no other ability, they don't have the resources in their neighborhoods to be, you know, install solar panels and buy, you know, sustainable food and all this stuff. Like, how can we keep using it, vision cast to them and reach out so that they can get on board through collective effort.
All right, so I heard the question, how do we vision cast to basically frontline communities to get them on board? Allie, yeah, go.
I think Naomi Klein, she was talking there for a little bit about reinvestment, and I think that's a really promising sort of way forward here. You can do things like create community development financial institutions where we, can shift our money out of fossil fuels, put it into these instruments that provide loans for economic development in the communities that currently, for no fault of their own, rely on fossil fuels for their, for jobs or for their tax base, something like that. So I think that's, one sort of tangible way to move forward. It's complicated, and I also think that I'd want to listen to the communities themselves. I know that right now in Massachusetts, we're working with a community in Salem that's got a coal plant right now, and the coal plant is being shut down, but there's a push to transition it to a gas plant. And out of the community, there are volunteer organizers there who are doing a lot about trying to figure out what can we do with this coal plant site that doesn't mean another gas plant, and I think really letting those solutions come up from the community itself is going to be far more effective than at least in my case, I'm not going to walk in and be able to dictate solutions. That's not my position in this movement. So. Being participatory.
Where are you at? I heard your question to be more like, what do we tell the people who depend on these industries for livelihood? Is that what you meant? Okay. Because I live in an oil workers town. There's 9,000, and most of them do work for the oil industry or are supported by the oil industry. Most of the people in our town, and most of the businesses in our town. And I really have had very little pushback. And the reason is, I think, is because I feel like, and I meant it, when I said that about love, I really feel like that's a powerful force, And I just tell them, man, I love you. And I don't want you to continue to be injured and taken advantage of by these companies. I want you to be safe, and I want you to have a safe place to raise your kids, and non-polluted water and non-polluted air. And they respond to that. And honestly, I've had very, very few, when they come to me with an open heart, I've had very few times where there's been any kind of intimidation from the workers themselves. And I think we have a lot more friends out in these industries than we think we do. And I think they're tired, and I don't think they want their kids working in this nasty, disgusting stuff anymore. I really don't. Especially in the coal industry, but also in the oil industry as well, from what I'm hearing. When I was at Power Shift, they had counter-protesters there, and they were from the coal industry. And I just went up and shook their hand. And I told them, I said, I hear you, and I understand you. And a large part of what we want to do is build an infrastructure that's safe and good and clean jobs for you and your kids. And they responded to that, And I told them, thank you for coming out and participating, because a lot of times people just don't, I want them to come. I want to see them. So I think that how you respond to that is just be open and honest and respectful of what they have to go through, because honestly, they die quite a bit out there. They get hurt, and even in the refineries, there's a lot of deaths and injuries, and a lot of people dying young, and a lot of widows that they don't feel like they have that voice, right? So we get to be the voice for them. And if we're honest about that with them and to them and involve them, and they don't feel like they're being attacked, I think we're going to be okay on that end. And as long as we figure out a way that they can be safe and provide for their families, because that's all they really want.
I had a job once working in inland steel. I worked in a department that had never seen anybody other than people from a particular village of eastern Poland, let alone to have anybody black work there. And for the first maybe 4.5 months, no one ever spoke to me except to give me something to work on or to comment on what I'd done. And so I had to wrestle with how I responded to this. I knew I was going to work it out, that I was going to stick it, because my family are strong trade unionists, and for me to leave that job would not have been in my family's tradition, because a lot of this organizing is about what we do day to day to day. The smallest, most trivial actions make a huge difference, especially in this country, in creating situations where people can trust and believe in you. About 2 years ago, I'm walking down the street 25 years later after that steel mill experience, and this older Polish guy comes up to me and he says, "You're Nesbitt, aren't you?" I said, "Yeah. Who are you?" He said, "I'm Jerry." "Jerry? Jerry," I said. He said, "Yeah. I'm the guy that greeted you that time at the drinking fountain." All these years, this guy has been proud of the fact that he greeted me when nobody else would. So I embraced him, grabbed him. I think that's part of what we have to be able to do. It's like this manifestation of what Cherri's been talking about, of love. And so one of the things that's critical that you do as you do this campaign here at Tulane, speak to everybody. Speak to everybody around. Every day, every time you get a chance, speak to them. Say hello. These are all part of the trivial actions that lead to ultimate, real change and victory.
All right, so I'm going to take one more question from Twitter, and then we're going to close up. But I know that some of our panelists might be able to take questions later, if you can find them. No, I'm just kidding. So this one's, I'm actually going to sort of combine two of them. So Divest Fort Lewis asks, and maybe Allie, you can take this. Here at Fort Lewis College, we have a very small committed group. What kind of bold action can we take that will escalate our movement? And sort of couched in that question, for campuses that got a no or get the runaround, what sort of bold action tactics can folks take?
So I think in that case, which sounds pretty similar to Harvard's, I think the strategy needs to have two components. One is like power building tactics, doing things that allow you to talk to hundreds of students, so over time your group can grow, because you're not going to be able to do the sort of like put your body in front of the machine and stop it actions until you have a very large base to draw on. So that's important. But at the same time, I think taking the bold actions you can with a small crew will add momentum and, you know, push forward your movement. There are lots of things a small number of people can do. You can, I don't know, if your president is speaking somewhere, that's pretty easy to like disrupt it with signs or something like that. If you can get helium balloons and tie them to a banner and float them up to the middle of your dining hall so it can't be taken down. You can, you can be creative and, you know, find exciting, novel, artistic, and beautiful or funny actions to take that put pressure on your decision makers, but also are very attractive and appealing to the students who see them too. So over time, they come back to join your movement. And I'm sort of regurgitating a book called Beautiful Trouble here right now. That's where all of that comes from. So I'd suggest looking that up because it's an amazing resource.
I want to suggest too that my experience with the corporate decision maker types, both in the union world and in our divestment campaigns, and I think also with all that we're doing with climate justice, it's very important to remember that these corporate decision maker types like to appear to the rest of their world as if everything is fine. And so one of the places I think it's important is to encounter them in the places where they don't want to have these issues raised. One of those that's been most effective has been churches. In the civil rights years in Chicago, we never missed churches of some of these realtors. When they went to service, they got out, the first thing they saw was some of us with a picket sign. We didn't even have to say anything. We just stay throughout the whole service. And that's a way of putting it in the other spheres of their life, where they don't like to have their peers know about the bad things that they're doing, the brutal things, the death-causing things.
There's a reason that BP spent billions of dollars for NPR. There's a reason for that, because that's their Achilles heel, right? So you give them bad press anytime you can. They're right. I mean, I'm all for, I mean, I've been arrested before. I don't mind. Like, I'm all for going for their houses and camping out in the front yard. I mean, we have to take, when I say take bold action, I mean, you do whatever you do and you act like your life depends on it, because let me tell you, your life depends on it. What would you do to save your life? How far would you go, right? Because that's what you need to do right now. You need to get out in the streets, right? And we need big armies and little armies and people talking individually and all those things coming down. We need people working in policy. We need people working in art and music and spreading that word that way. There's really nothing that you, besides being divisive, there's nothing that you can do that's wrong. You can't make a wrong move here. And then also, I remember, I just want to relate a story. One time we were at the Shrimp Festival in Alabama, and there's a group called the Mobile Environmental Justice Advocacy Services and Alabama Coast United. They had a little group out there that was doing a little rally, and it was during the Shrimp Festival, and what we were doing was we were protesting BP, and we were really concerned about the contamination in the seafood at the time. And they came to us, they said, look, you cannot protest here, you have to go over there on the other side, and they wouldn't even give us a permit, and, you know, threatened that the police were going to come and everything. We said, okay. So we went way off, and I mean to tell you, it was way out, like the other side of this field over here. You know, you couldn't see us. The people as they go by, they couldn't see us. You know, and we danced and yelled and talked and sang and you know, spoke I love yous to people as they passed by on the beach. And the time went by, you know, we all felt like, man, we didn't do very much. It was kind of lame because we had to stay all the way out there and everything. Well, then pretty soon we sitting there at TV watching TV. The BP commercial came on and showed the Shrimp Festival. That's us. And we were way out there, and we were just little bitty people out in the thing. But what we do, we turned around, we wrote a press release, and we put it out. It was in USA Today that the protesters was on the beach protesting BP, you know? So what I'm trying to say is all these little things, if you think they don't matter, they really do, and you never know what's going to come back to bite them. And stay on their arse. Stay on their arse.
Thank you so much. And thanks for your questions. Good night.
Amanda! Amanda!
I forgot it. How does it go? Amanda.
You can go way too.
You can go way too.
No, it got to come from way down. You can go way too. There you go. That's what you go to sleep on now.